Boa tarde, estamos aqui no Liberin com a presença do Scott Horton, nosso grande convidado, que está estreando a parceria entre o Liberin e a OCL, a Ordem dos Cavaleiros da Liberdade, hoje representada pelo Rodrigo Andolfato. Eu sou a Priscila Merizio, estarei falando com o público em português e o Rodrigo representará a nossa ponte internacional, conversando em inglês com o Scott Horton. Pedimos muito para que vocês fiquem conosco até o final, porque a entrevista será maravilhosa. Preparamos várias perguntas e ao final da entrevista nós divulgaremos com alguns detalhes o que vem para 2026 nessa parceria entre o Liberin e a OCL. Scott Horton, muito obrigada pela sua presença. O Rodrigo vai traduzir depois. Sinta-se à vontade. Você está muito bem-vindo aqui no Brasil, viu? E queremos você conosco no ano que vem. Obrigada.
Good afternoon, Professor Horton. It's an enormous pleasure for us to receive you in the Liberin. First enterprise with OCL, which means Ordo Commilitorum Libertatis. In English, the Order of the Knights of Liberty. First of all, we would love to receive from you an introduction of yourself for our Brazilian audience. So feel free, and it's an enormous pleasure to have you here.
Well, sure. Thank you very much, both of you, for having me here. I'm sorry I don't speak Portuguese. The only thing I know how to say in Portuguese I learned from my friend when I was a little boy. My friend down the street was part Portuguese, and he taught me how to say muy loco cabeça. So that's me, extremely crazy in the head. But yeah, so I'm basically a Texan and a skater and an anti-government type with, I guess, a special fixation on foreign policy and opposition to American imperialism. I've written a book about Afghanistan and the broader terror wars throughout the Middle East. And then my latest book is about the Cold War with Russia. And I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, if that tells you much. If people want to look into me, if you go to my X account, my Twitter account is just x.com/Scott Horton Show. I have all my links to all my different projects there, my books, my show, my academy, and my institute, and all of my different stuff that I'm doing there if people want to look into that. But basically, I'm just an anti-government, anti-war libertarian type.
Perfect. Could you please tell us more about your academy and what motivated you to create it?
Well, the purpose of the academy essentially is to try to train up a new generation of anti-war people to really be, for a baseline as good as me on this stuff, and then really advance it further. I mean, the lesson I think of the last few years especially is that whenever an anti-war guy, whether they're a libertarian or a paleoconservative or even leftists and progressives, whenever they go up against a hawk, the hawk loses. And the war party essentially has a bunch of lies to stand on. And anybody who really knows anything about it can always kick their butt in front of everybody else. And so, but what we need is just more people who are up to that task. And so the purpose of this is essentially to provide people with these very long form courses where it's, essentially equivalent, I hope, to like a college course where people can take, a long form kind of tour through Middle East policy and Eastern European policy, especially for my part, but I also have other specialists on other areas, to really get everybody up to snuff, caught up with me, and then so we can all take them on together. And I think as you guys must see this even from where you are way down south, but right here in this country, the war party is in crisis because people just don't believe in them anymore. And so on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, people aren't just against war. They hate it now. They are so sick and tired of hearing about their money being wasted killing people when we got our own problems here. And so the time is with us. So we need to do, those of us who are already like this really need to do the best that we can to help guide the movement and make sure that people are armed with the right information to really, carry the fight forward.
Do you agree with Senator Ron Paul that it's a strange coincidence that the period of creation of central bank, the Fed, and all these wars abroad, do you agree with him that this is not a coincidence? It's
Yes.
a result of it. And what is your relation with Senator Ron Paul and all the libertarians in the United States, and most of all with Mises Institute, Alabama?
Well, I consider myself absolutely a devotee of Dr. Paul. You can actually see over my head there is a bust of him. I don't know if you can see in the light there. And then here over his shoulder is my book. That's a book, a collection of interviews that I did of Dr. Paul over about 20 years there, plus a speech I gave about how much I love the guy. And so I consider him to be the greatest American ever for the quantitative reason that he taught more people about liberty than anyone ever did before or ever. So that makes him the very greatest one of all of us, not just libertarians, but Americans. And I take a great many lessons from his wisdom on so many of these issues. On the question of inflationary money and unlimited, warfare and imperialism, I don't think that there's any question. And he's just being cute. He's just trying to get, tease you a little bit and make you think about it a little bit before he hands it to you on a silver platter. And like, what does a gold standard really mean? I mean, it means a lot of things, but it means handcuffs on the power of the government to spend money. They can only tax so much and they can only borrow so much. And so the government has to live within the means that the people can provide for their own security force there. But if they can break that chain from gold and just print money all day and back it up only with a threat, it's almost like, I don't know if you have this idiom this phrase in your language, but we call it begging the question when you kind of assume the conclusion thing. Like, doesn't Israel have the right to defend themselves? When they're not defending themselves, but you kind of bake that into the thing. It's the same kind of thing with the money, where it's a circular argument. As long as the government can wage the war of income taxation on the American people and forcibly confiscate our wealth, then they can pay interest to the bondholders who buy the government debt. And so then instead of having a gold standard, we just have an IRS standard. And I know people say it's an oil standard too, because we have a deal with the Saudis that they'll only trade in dollars and that kind of thing. But mostly what it is it's the government's promise that they will tax the American people in order to pay the people who own government securities, including foreign central banks who sit on them and use them instead of gold bricks. They sit on U.S. treasuries a lot of the times. And so it's an extremely corrupt system. But what it does is it allows the government to delay the consequences of their actions. So it'd be almost like, I guess I'm not thinking of a good analogy. I thought of one, but it wasn't good enough. But essentially what happens is you'll have one of the worst effects of inflationary money is you'll have what seems like artificial prosperity, as all that money, not necessarily new wealth, but new currency, new money, is being funneled into certain sectors. And then, so you'll have sort of this artificial prosperity as people bid up prices with all this new money. But then that leads then to the very real crash, this boom bust cycle, which I'm sure you guys have lived through this even in the worst kind of context down there with hyperinflation and massive crashes. In my lifetime, we have simply had boom after bust after boom after bust after boom after bust over and over. We never have just growth. It's always either kind of fake prosperity that some people are benefiting from while everyone else is suffering under high prices, or a massive crash where everybody's suffering. So a great example of this in terms of war would be when George W. Bush took office. We were already in a recession. The stock market had already crashed. The NASDAQ and the Dow had crashed in 99 and 2000 from the dot-com bust. Remember that?
Remember.
So W. Bush came in in the beginning of 2001. He said, hey, it was already a recession when I got here. Don't you call it the Bush recession. It's the Clinton recession. I just got here. We're going to do our best now, but we're starting from a crash. Okay, that was true. And then what happened? 8 months later, formerly American-backed kamikaze terrorists knocked our towers down right in the heart of the financial district in New York City, in the financial capital of America. And they used some of our biggest corporations, the airlines, to do it. And so that should have been, in any real world, a massive slam, a double dip on our recession. We're already in a recession, and then we get hit in the gut hard. Now, how do they respond to that? By lowering interest rates to zero and turning the money machine on full blast and essentially lying to the economy, pretending that we didn't have to suffer economic pain from, one, the dot-com bubble, and two, a massive kamikaze attack on downtown New York City. That's going to hurt. And they said, no. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to shoot you up with morphine. You're going to not feel that pain. And we're going to paper over the economic pain with paper money, with not new wealth, but with new money. And then what happened? We all know the story. They brought the whole damn world economy to its knees with the crash of 2008, which was the result of the boom of 2002 through 8, right? And so, and that boom was created, why? To make the wars seem free. Now, America could afford to send the Delta Force and the Navy SEALs to Afghanistan to kill a few Arabs. That's easy, okay? But do you want to regime change Afghanistan and occupy the place forever? And if you want to spread the war to a regime change in Iraq and then Somalia and Libya and Syria and wherever else you want to go, well, you're going to have to be able to make it look like it's free, make it feel like it's free. And in fact, in 2003 and 2004, they actually sent out what seemed like dividend checks to all American taxpayers, got like an extra bonus stimulus check for $300 or $400, which really felt like that was your part of the profit from the war, that we were all making so much money off the war that you get an extra $400 kickback from it. But of course, that was all money they printed out of nothing. And so what happened was people were so deceived by that artificial prosperity and the cost of absolutely decimating Iraqi society, by the way, that then they paid for it in the time they spent staring at their shoes down in the unemployment line, right? They paid for the cost of the war in the time laid off, unproductive, or worse, splitting up with their wife, losing custody of their children, losing, having to close their business and fire 20 guys that work for them and destroy all their families too. And all of those horrible, extremely real consequences that come from the very real crash, that comes from the artificial boom, that comes from the phony money, because they're no longer bound by that gold standard. And there's just no disputing Ron Paul's take on this. There's only ignoring it or submitting to it. He's just right.
But can you imagine this problem, how elevated to the highest potency on other countries? Because when you have this funny money, which is dollars, that is desired for everyone abroad, not only the citizens of the United States. So the world is arrested not only on the military power of the United States. We are chained on cuffs, as you said, on the dollar system that was created in 71. But not talking about economy, that we have an audience that loves the Second Amendment of the American Constitution. What do you think? And on your book, you talk about that after the Cold War, the corrective idea or the waiting, what the American wait for its government their government was to look for the internal problems. What happened? Do you think that the United States doesn't could handle itself if it looks to the internal problems? There is always the need to look for the next war. Is that, and why in your books? In your book, you will start with George H.W. Bush and not talking about Ronald Reagan. What's your perception of Reagan and all that need of war abroad by the United States?
Sure. Okay, so there's a lot there. Now, first of all, the book starts with H.W. Bush because he was the president at the end of the Soviet Union. So the Cold War had originally begun to end in 1985, 1986, when Ronald Reagan just got along pretty well with the young, new Premier Gorbachev. And Reagan just said, "Put her there, pal. Let's be friends." And just kind of, okay, I guess we're friends now. Like, and just, and really won a lot of successes there, and culminating really in the demise of the USSR. Because once they started allowing, loosening up control at all, the whole thing just unraveled. Because it was all held together with violence, and the credible threat of more. So I start with H.W. Bush because, in a way, especially like if you think about his great speeches where he's announcing this is the dawn of the new world order and all that. I mean, quite literally or quite figuratively, the world is in his hands, right? It's a decade before the great year 2000. Not just the end of the decade and the century, but the end of the millennium and the dawn of the new one. And now the evil commie empire is gone. America, land of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and free market capitalism and freedom and liberty and the hope for all mankind. We are the lone superpower in the world. As Bush said, what we say goes. That's the new world order. You can do what we want you to do. But as Bush put it, the world is okay with that because they trust us with this power because they know that we will do the right thing, blah, 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 blah. But the problem is it's just built in, man. And Americans are good people, fine. But it's just built in the incentive structures. There's too much money in the game of international security. I mean, what does it mean? It means big ticket items like CIA budgets and aircraft carriers and long-range hydrogen bombers. And these things cost massive tens, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure to build and to maintain permanently. And, me and Ron Paul might disagree, but just about anyone else in the entire society, even if we were to be completely non-interventionist, everyone would still want us to have a powerful Navy and a powerful Air Force and a nuclear deterrent, so no one would ever consider messing with us. And so at the very least, we have a government that's powerful enough to keep the peace between the 50 states, powerful enough to keep Europe and Asia at bay, and in fact, powerful enough that when the English come calling, we can come and bail their ass out twice in a row as we have before. And so, and really, that's the story, right? Is that at the end of the Second World War, the military force that Roosevelt had built up to conquer the German Nazis and the Imperial Japanese was too big to fail or to be scaled back down. And they were determined on restarting the new conflict, the first Cold War. The problem is, I'm just not good enough on that. I know that's true. And I know, my friend Gareth Porter, who's the best, he's writing a book that's a revisionist take on the first Cold War right now. And I know that great libertarians like Murray Rothbard and Robert Higgs and others agreed that the first Cold War was more or less a scam, that they knew that Stalin wasn't really going to come west by at least the early 50s. And he died in 54 anyway. And so, or was it 53? But it's the Army GIs in Vietnam, they called it the self-licking ice cream cone. That means the Army is its own reason to exist, and they will find things to do. And that goes for the rest of the military and the CIA and the Pentagon and the National Security Agency and all of the departments. the NSC in the White House. Nobody wants to lose the power they have. And so they'll come up with a reason to keep it. And that goes to a general who runs a base out in Kyrgyzstan somewhere. They set up a base way out there in the name of fighting communism. And then the communists are gone. So they go, oh, you know what we'll do? We'll interdict drug traffic. Or, you know what I mean? They come up with a new thing to do just so they can stay. And it just becomes, it becomes essentially almost impossible. Oh, and then let me add real quick. And then all the foreign lobbies. Because America is a world empire, that means it is very much in the interests of the English and the French and the Italians and the Israelis and the Japanese and the South Koreans to keep America at their beck and call. Why would they want to fight their own wars if they can get us to fight them or at least pay for them? And even better, there is a lot of truth to this, even though I'm opposed to the whole system, that when America spreads its so-called nuclear umbrella, and they say, hey, don't you ever mess with France or you're messing with us. Well, that's a real deterrent from anyone messing with France. Nobody wants to fight America. We got thousands of H-bombs and everybody knows it. And so if we give a war guarantee, that does make smaller countries feel more comfortable. It's just the problem is leave major powers like Russia on the outside. Now you've created a whole new conflict for all of us, right? So we have those things built in. But just to explain, though, why you have so many different vested interests who want to keep the thing going, even when if it was just you and your wife sitting across the kitchen table trying to consider what's good for America in the long term, what's good for our society, we wouldn't come up with all this crazy stuff, not in a million years. But to them, it makes sense because this is how they stay paid.
Correct me if I'm wrong. George H.W. Bush, did he re-elected or not? Because Reagan, he didn't re-elect, huh?
Correct.
Then we had after Bush, Bill Clinton.
Right.
And I remember when he was accused on the Senate of perjury, of having lied to the Congress, he said a phrase that I never forgot, which was, people don't matter if it doesn't matter if you lie to Congress or to the people if economy is growing. When he asked to Alan Greenspan to print more money, and he was right. He was absolved from all his crimes, all his accusations. Yep. And what brings us always to the same point. United States has what we say, not money, but the wealthiness of the world, which is funny, wealthiness, but it is what every country needs. And now we saw the power of the dollar when in Argentina we have, I don't know if you like him or not, President Milei, and it's a question if you like him or not, and Trump really saved Argentina from getting on the bad hands again. What do you think about this monetary power of the United States to help, and if this is really a help, an aid, or it is something else?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a total non-interventionist on this stuff. And I think when you have the Americans picking winners and losers overseas, they're almost always just going to make matters worse. We saw for 20 years, they tried to prop up different factions in power in Afghanistan. And then it's almost like propping up a stock market bubble. Once you stop propping it up with phony money and GIs on the ground, the thing crashes. And so it's just like, if you look at, people look at our economic problems and they just can only imagine they need a stronger hand of government to fix it, to reindustrialize the country, to drive up wages, to stop the bad thing from happening. If you look at all the places where they actually do have a national economic plan in American society, they destroy everything they touch. The most prominent examples of this are the university system and the medical care system, where they'll guarantee to help you pay the cost, no matter the cost. And then the cost goes up to high heaven. And it's only because there's a ridiculous giant federal government subsidized loan behind it. And one that, because of Joe Biden, passed a law years ago, says you're not allowed to declare bankruptcy and get out from under your student loan. And it's a federal government loan. It's why you call me a professor. It's why I never went to college, because I wasn't willing to take out a loan from the government at all in that rigged system and pay a hugely inflated price. And if you adjust for inflation and go back, in the 1950s or 60s, you could work at McDonald's in the summer and save up enough money as a few $1,000s to go to college all year round. Nowadays, it's like high tens of thousands of dollars a year. It's completely bankrupt a family to put their kid in college. And then if they're not actually going to study hard sciences or engineering or business or something where they can really turn that around, they're just going to get a liberal arts degree, then they're taking on a lifetime of debt in some cases. It's just a disaster. And why? You thought a bunch of congressmen know best how to distribute goods and services around? Yeah, right. They know how to take a bribe. They know how to make a textbook company rich. They know how to, hire an entire legion of administrators to run a university that do nothing but suck up tax wealth from everyone else. They know how to actually deliver a quality education to people. Yeah, right. The dumbest, most self-interested, most corrupt people in society. I would rather let an evil, selfish, self-interested businessman try to figure out how to make a profit delivering a high quality education to people at a reasonable price. I know how markets work. They work like that. Let's do that. Medical care is the same thing. Absolute crisis in every way. No one can afford it. So people beg government to help them pay the bill. But government is why the bill is so high in the first place. Yes. And so on, as Ludwig von Mises said, the middle of the road leads to socialism, because the middle of the road screws everything up even more, drives prices up even more. So then people are even more desperate to have the government come and bail them out in the end.
I will still introduce you always as a professor, because a professor is not the ones that go to the college. I have a doctorate degree, but doesn't matter. What matters is what we have to teach the others. So if you let me, I will still calling you Professor Scott.
That's very kind of you.
But there is one thing that you point out that I need to mention. Here in Brazil, one of the books that I like the most of Mises, in addition of Human Action, because it is the book, but is the middle road heads to the left. Mm-hmm. There is no translation to Portuguese, so there are a good audience of good people here with us that can translate the book. That is one of the most important book. It remembers me the Bible when it says that the people that's not hot, neither cold, will be spit out, will be thrown out, because it is. It's like that joke. The devil, the people on heaven asking the guy over the wall, come here, and the devil quietly saying nothing, and the guy asked him, why you are not inviting me to go to hell with you? And the devil says, you are already with me. People that are in the middle road is that guy. I need to ask you, Professor Horton, one thing. How do you see Brazil potentially reversing the process of what we say addiction to the power of the United States? And if this would be the right moment, because we have a leftist government here.
Yeah. You guys, I feel bad for you. I mean, first of all, I plead total ignorance. I don't know nearly enough about it, but I know that overall you're in the same situation as a lot of countries, which is that you're dominated by this massive regional power where so much of your domestic decision-making depends on what's going on in Washington, D.C. and shots that they're going to call for you where you're just under our thumb. And I know that in the past, there was even a fascist dictatorship, a coup, and a dictatorship that was supported by the United States there. And I know that America supported the leftists sometimes, and then turned around and supported the right wingers. And like, who knows? Like, I'm very reluctant to comment on or weigh in on any particular side of there because I don't know who's backing who or what. But I know that if it was me, just generally speaking, the concern would be that when you lower your protectionism, because you need international trade and open capitalism, that when you do that, then major resources just get taken by pre-existing massive multinational corporations with access to international finance and whatever. And so then all the opening up of your economy doesn't do your people any good. All that money just gets extracted and taken away to Switzerland somewhere or to New York City or whatever. So I know I actually saw a funny thing because I'm a skateboarder and I'm always very interested in this. And I saw a documentary about skateboarding in Brazil, and which, by the way, some of the world's greatest skateboarders have been coming out of Brazil for the last 20 years or so, 25 years, including Bob Burnquist is, of course, the most famous, but there's a lot of them, Sandro Diaz and many others. But they had kind of copies of American skateboards down there because they were not allowed, like the tariffs on California skateboards were so high. And then they had kind of copycat Brazilian skateboards, like trying to mimic the American skateboard technology, like in the 80s, I think, especially at that time. I don't know if they've lifted the tariffs since then, but they showed about how so much of the Brazilian economy was like that. It's like absolutely prohibitive tariffs on international trade in order to force domestic production, which is like, has its benefits, but then of course is also very uneconomical and causes a lot of distortions and untenable policies. So how do you transform from, and this is something that America has suffered with too, how do you transform from a very protectionist society to lowering your tariffs and opening up to international trade, and with all the benefits that come from that and the necessity of it, with also being able to still, to coin a term, protect from some of the worst consequences of the transition, which can be, very painful for people when domestic factories are closed down, for example, as we've had here in America. There's still a lot of hard feelings and consequences left over from the deindustrialization of the 1990s. And so, this is a problem that especially, regimes around the world that have had so much governmental intervention in the economy, and they have to figure out how to relax that and allow more freedom and prosperity, and of course still hold on to their own control, but also not cause the people to rebel against them for too much change too quickly.
Before we keep going on our interview, I would like to ask Priscilla to make an invitation for Professor Horton, because if there is any curiosity to come to Brazil, next year will be the correct time to do it. Priscilla, nós poderíamos agora falar um pouquinho do que vem por aí no ano que vem? A little bit. So, do your best.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Por favor, explique para o professor que se nós não estivéssemos ao vivo, eu estaria arranhando o meu inglês. Mas como temos audiência, eu prefiro ficar no português mesmo, porque está mais formal a conversa, tá? Então, só explicar para ele, mas que eu estou prestando atenção em tudo.
E vamos convidá-lo para vir para o ano que vem? O que vem por aí?
Eu já fiz o convite para o Scott Horton, professor Scott Horton. Eu já fiz o convite para ele. A assistente dele disse que, infelizmente, por causa da agenda dele, né, de julho do ano que vem, talvez ele não possa vir. Mas nós gostaríamos de reforçar a vinda do Scott Horton para a grande novidade, que é essa parceria entre a OCL e o Liberin. Nós ainda não vamos entregar totalmente, mas nós estamos organizando a vinda de palestrantes nacionais e internacionais para algo que a gente vai divulgar no final dessa live. Já temos convidados internacionais confirmadíssimos e nacionais também. E nós gostaríamos muito que o professor Scott Horton estivesse pessoalmente conosco, vindo conhecer em loco o Brasil, São Paulo, O interior de São Paulo, Araçatuba, que é uma cidade muito bonita, muito agradável, arborizada. Enfim, o nosso convite está feito aqui. Gostaríamos muito, muito, muito da sua presença, professor. Se você não consegue remanejar a sua agenda para estar aqui conosco, que vai ser uma honra muito grande para nós, verdadeiramente.
Vou passar. Professor Horton, did you get what Priscilla invited you? Or
not really. I mean, I know what you're talking about because we were back and forth about this in the email a little bit here. This event that you guys are having, but no, I didn't follow much.
Well, she is inviting.
Sounded nice.
Saying that
eu só quero aproveitar para fazer um elogio para Rachel. Rachel is fabulous. I love her. She's
yes.
Very nice, very nice.
Para
so we're in agreement about that. Sure.
É a secretária do Scott Horton nos Estados Unidos. And Professor Horton, we are planning an international congress in Brazil in July, and it will be of great honor for us if you can reschedule all your agenda and probably come. And to make a link with all this we have talked and the Congress, the International Congress, which we are planning to attend, realize here. What I would like to ask you, you told that you are a great fan of Dr. Ron Paul, and what others philosophers do you like to read about libertarianism and all the philosophy of liberty?
Well, you know, I don't put that much work into that kind of thing anymore these days, but I actually, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm bad at my job. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. So I got about 25 great libertarian writers who write about all aspects of libertarianism on a regular basis there. We published 18 books now and counting, including my colleague Sheldon Richmond, that is the co-founder of the Institute with me. He wrote a really great libertarian primer called What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. And that's kind of a takeoff on a book by an American liberal from 100 years ago called named William Graham Sumner, who wrote a book called What Social Classes Owe to Each Other. And Sheldon says, well, this is what individuals owe to each other, and that is primarily what he calls the non-aggression obligation, that we are obligated to not aggress against each other, and that is the original basis of all civilization, and then explains libertarianism from there. It's the unified field theory of liberty, including, you know, revisionist history and natural rights theory and sound Austrian school economics and all that great stuff. And so that's one good one to start. And we got a whole great crew over there. So if people are interested in reading up, especially on current events from a libertarian perspective, but also on core libertarian principles and stuff like that, we've got a lot for you there. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, I have to mention, of course, is Murray N. Rothbard. For people who are not familiar, he's who we call Mr. Libertarian. My favorite essay by him is called The Left and Right, The Prospects for Liberty, from 1965. And it's just a really great introduction into libertarian thought and what we have in common and what our differences are with the left and the right. And sort of the way Rothbard conceives it, I think I agree that true.
I'm sorry. What do you think about Hoppe, which he wrote the book Democracy, the God That Fails? What do you think about him?
Well, I haven't read his books, but I have read, you know, a lot of his articles, and I do, you know, overall, I agree with the premise, or, you know, the conclusion, I guess, that we just don't really need government. If we can figure out a way to do all these things privately.
One thing that I like the most of his book, Democracy, the God That Fails, is that, and I believe you are going to agree with me, the old Wild West, well, with the spirit still lives in Texas, was the first libertarian society. And most of all, I don't know if you agree with that, which was based on the run to the West in the the very beginning of the United States as a country with all the capital letters, which I don't agree. I like the Franklinian thoughts of confederations, which for me is the best part of the beginning of the United States. And then when it becomes the federation and all the sense of the United States as a big country starts the problem. But when people go west to colonize, or I don't know how to express that movement, they start with a principle that is the private property is only yours if you can put the marks on it and if you can defend it, which in a reasonable way to think is correct and is correct. But if there was some owners before the guy over there, it could be called by something stole. Like if the land belongs to the Indians, that was not yours. What is your idea from the beginning of the United States and all this run to the West, and what made the libertarian model to become real? What's your think about that? Because you live in Texas. I love Bandera, which is the ranch capital in Texas, and which is fabulous.
Well, look, there's a lot of contradictions in the whole American story. You know, I mean, the guys who founded the American regime and waged the American Revolution, created the U.S. Constitution, they were almost all of them devotees of John Locke and the Scottish Enlightenment and the whole idea of natural property rights theory and all that. You take some untamed land and you tame it, you make it your own, you mix your labor with it. Somehow, I guess that means plant some carrots and then harvest them again and eat them. And so now it's yours. Build a fence around it. And as long as you have first claim on it, then it's not just your ability to defend it, but it's other people's respect for that same right that they have too, to claim some territory. And then from there on, whatever they claim or whatever they can buy with, you know, and justly acquire from other people by peaceful means, then that property's got to originate somewhere. Now, you know, I went to junior college for a couple of years and I took philosophy class, and we studied Locke and Hume and Spinoza and Montesquieu and Hobbes and all of these guys. And they all argue in these sort of like a geometry problem, like these syllogisms, right? We know A, B, C, D, therefore we can conclude F or whatever. But the thing is, they're all full of crap. They all have like some just sort of presumed or assumed part of their argument that they can't quite prove, but they wish they could. And so like, you know, I like Thomas Jefferson's take. He goes, oh, you know what? These truths are self-evident to me. All right, there you go. I was born free. I got a gun. And what are you going to do about it, dude? That's my philosophical proof, right? And that's how they wrote it in the Declaration of Independence. So I couldn't sit here and argue all the libertarian angels on the head of a pin and all the different, you know, best arguments for natural rights theory or for, you know, more probably realistic civil rights theories about human liberties really being the extent to which they're tolerated by their neighbors in practice and that kind of thing. Like, people can argue about all those kinds of things all day. I'm not really good at that kind of stuff. I know definitely what seems right to me about how free I and others ought to be, you know. As far as the Wild West, I mean, yes, first of all, they're ethnically cleansing millions of people off of their land so that they can say, oh, look, a land without people. Have you heard of that one? A people without land, a land without people. What a coincidence. And we gotta, you know, kill them and round them up and drive them off the land at bayonet point. But otherwise, virgin territory here, you know. And look, I mean, I read a really great book about the founding of Austin. And is one of the very first original founding fathers of Austin, Texas, said, like, listen, you can't blame them. We're taking the land where their grandfathers are buried. We're taking it for our own. Like, that's true. That's what happened. So is that just freedom and liberty? Yeah, sure. For the Anglos, it is. For the Indians, no. It's the exact opposite of that. But then overall, then in there, the settlers' relationship with the central government. I mean, I know more about Texas than I know about out west, but I guess I know overall in the settlement of the plains and the settlement of the mountains in the far western states that oftentimes the settler populations would outpace the Union troops or any kind of territorial civil authority by sometimes even decades, or, you know, certainly by many years. And so they would have to come up with their own customs of law without having a necessarily like a single marshal in this area who's there to enforce it yet. And then, so this is the same kind of thing that you have like in honor cultures around the world, as they essentially come from a place where people have to respect the law because there's no one to enforce it. And so people just go along. This is how we do business around here. A handshake means something. And if you start acting like your handshake doesn't mean something, then there's going to be real consequences for you, because everyone else is agreed around here that if we can't rely on each other's word, our society won't function at all. So put her there, pal, and I'll see you this time next week with my money, you know? And that's the way it has to be. And so you have customs like that come from people being essentially left to their own devices. So then there's important lessons in that, right? It's like, take a guy who's kind of a kook and give him a firearm and watch him sober up, actually, and start acting a little bit more grown up. Instead of like an idiot with a firearm, now he starts acting like an adult because he realizes that, like, hey, man, I can't just go get into fights all the time if I have a gun on me, right? Because things can escalate way out of control too quickly then. And so maybe now, so the more responsibility you put on people, the more likely they are to actually govern themselves and act properly in the first place. And so that's the trade-off. This is what Harry Brown, it's just, I guess, unfortunate about the English language that we have two words for it. But Harry Brown says, no, liberty and responsibility are the same thing. The things that are up to you are the things that you are responsible for, and vice versa. That's it. So
that's
like my old bumper sticker said, stay free, govern yourself.
But one thing brings me to this question for you, Horton. Your book argues that the new Cold War began not with Putin, but with the US decisions in 1991, during this period. How does this interpretation align with Benjamin Franklin's, because you said that Thomas Jefferson said, okay, I have my gun and I have to fight for what I believe it's right. Yep. But that was the articles of the Confederation that was looking more inside the internal issues more than the external issues. So how does this interpretation align with Benjamin Franklin's confederative principle of avoiding centralized imperial power more than Thomas Jefferson's Constitution?
Well, actually, Jefferson was the ambassador to France and was not involved in writing the Constitution, and Benjamin Franklin, in fact, was. And Franklin, you know, I think, Jefferson would have been the one he supported the Constitution. His friend James Madison was the principal author of the thing, and he did support it. But I think he would have been more reluctant than Benjamin Franklin to support a centralized government. And by the way, that phrase about it's self-evident, Jefferson actually originally wrote, we hold these truths, that is about human rights, natural rights. We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. And Franklin said, I don't know, because sacred, people could argue about religious faith or not and what sacred means. How about we just say self-evident? In other words, make it as simple as possible. I don't really, by saying it's self-evident, what they're saying is, I don't owe you an explanation and you're not getting one, right? That's what they're saying. It seems to us that we're all born free and that we have the right to run our own lives and we have the right to hire our own security force to protect our rights. And if the king is acting like a tyrant, then we have the right to overthrow him, because he does not have the right to be a tyrant over us, because we were born free, because we say so. And so that's where that came from, and is the greatest part of the American tradition, and is really the seed of all libertarianism. It flows from that same set of arguments from the Declaration. But look, here's the irony of the whole thing, okay? And it's essentially unavoidable. If you have a free society, it'll be a prosperous one. And if it's prosperous enough, it'll be able to afford a government big enough to go and cause problems for it. You know what I mean? And that's what we have here. We need somehow, and I don't know exactly what Hans Hoppe would say about this, okay? But somebody has to make sure that we don't have wars over who controls the Mississippi River, okay? And what we've decided is Articles of Confederation or Constitution, one way or the other, we're going to have a centralized government powerful enough to prevent the 50 states from ever fighting. The idea that Texas would ever go to war with Oklahoma or Louisiana is absolutely preposterous, impossible, unthinkable. Not in a million years. Forget it. We're all in one country together. That's it. But then any government that's powerful enough to make all these 50 states one big nation state is powerful enough to try to take over the whole damn planet, right? I mean, at this point, you know, the European nations have almost, in a way, been made states in the Union, right? I mean, ultimately, the power of Washington, D.C. is the war power. That's what makes it the national government. Well, they have extended that war power authority over all of Europe with their NATO expansion. And of course, a lot of East Asia as well. And in a sense, incorporated these foreign lands, not necessarily into our nation, into our country in any real way, but extended their authority over them in the same type of a fashion. And then this is what has us on a collision course toward Russia and China, who are armed with thermonuclear weapons. In other words, they have the power to tell us no. And so now we're at a point where our government says, no, we only understand one thing, and that is yes. And so this is why we're running up against them. And as I demonstrate in the book, from the 1990s and all the way through, even the people who advocated the expansion of our military alliance into Eastern Europe still knew better and warned that, hey, if you take my advice and do this, be very careful about how you do it, because it's guaranteed to generate a massive Russian backlash. And our job will be to keep that massive backlash much smaller and try to prevent it from being so bad that it ends up into a war. That was even the Hawks. Never mind Ron Paul saying we shouldn't be doing this at all. These are the people who are saying we should be doing this. They go, well, we better be real careful, though, because they understand exactly what they're doing. They're not erasing dividing lines. They're just moving them east. They're making, imagine it from Moscow's point of view. You have this massive buffer area of all of Eastern Europe to halfway across Germany to protect you from the Americans in the Cold War and whatever, the offensive threat from the Germans and anyone west of them. Now at the end of the Soviet Union, all that falls away, including the Baltic states, including Ukraine is independent, Belarus is semi-independent. And then the American military alliance keeps moving closer and closer and closer. While meanwhile, instead of being evil totalitarian commies anymore, now you're red, white, and blue, conservative Christian Russia, Republican Russia. So from their point of view, this is just virtually pure aggression on the Americans' part. Now, the Americans insist it's a defensive alliance. All we're doing is we're warning you, don't you attack Bulgaria or Romania or Latvia, or you're going to have a problem with us. But just don't attack them then, and everything will be fine. Well, the Russians go, yeah, well, it looks more like you're ringing our country with military bases, which we have to take as an offensive threat. No matter how many times you call it defensive, what does it mean? You're trying to bring Ukraine and Georgia into the military alliance, where you already promised not to move missile forces or any military forces into the new NATO nations. And you already broke that promise by putting permanent bases in Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, and missile stations in Poland and Romania. And you say that, oh, you want to bring Ukraine into NATO, but you promise you won't put your own weapons in there? Well, we already seen you're not willing to go with that. Anything short of a treaty, and even a treaty, you might break it. But anything short of a treaty, and there's no one believes that you'll stick by your word just because you gave it. You know, speaking of the Old West, those norms are dead in Washington. I'll tell you that. Handshake don't mean a thing to them.
And that's the point that always brings me some doubt of if it's correct not to think as in a defensive way, or like you are saying, United States is stepping forward inch by inch, going nearby Moscow in well, how would I say that? Step by step. But of course, Russia would say, well, you lied first. I'm not attacking Ukraine, but you said that you would not put military bases of NATO nearby me after the Cold War. And if you broke a promise, we have to do something to alert all the world. In looking in this point of view, what do you think about what's happening right now in South America? Maduro is a communist, is a despot, a totalitarian governor of Venezuela. But what do you think about the matters, the issues that Trump is bringing to view, to knowledge of all over the world about traffic and the regime of Maduro, and how is the United States acting to reordinate the South America power and policy?
Well, look, I'm afraid that there's going to be a war. I mean, they've built up a massive military force there, and they're trying to force one kind of concession or another. I know that the Hawks in Washington have presented all different kinds of plans to Trump for options on airstrikes, on trying to insert special operations teams to kill Maduro, or even a full-scale like regime change war, and God knows what. I think it's all the height of madness. It's just like W. Bush messing around in Iraq, which is absolutely unforced error that should not be undertaken. And the guy, you know, as commie as he is, it doesn't make him like Joe Stalin, where he's like putting people in death camps by the millions or whatever, right? He's got really lousy economic policies. His predecessor, Hugo Chavez, did plenty to destroy the Venezuelan economy before Maduro ever got there. And he has done virtually nothing to make it better. I would hasten to add, though, that the American superpower has also been waging a massive economic war against Venezuela through sanctions since at least 2005. And so I don't know how to quantify it in terms of percentages, but some major proportion of their economic crisis is because of America waging an economic war against them, not just their lousy economic policies. And one example of this is their oil resources. They could hire any company from around the world, the French or whoever, to come in and pump their oil and maintain all of their equipment and keep it all going. Communists can't do that, but multinational corporations from wherever it stand can, right? But America won't let them. There's an economic war that says, boy, if the French try to pump that Venezuelan oil, you're going to have to mess with the Treasury Department first, and it ain't going to be worth it. We'll make sure it's not worth it. And so they've essentially outlawed international trade with this country, which is already screwed, which is already under a commie thumb. And now you see how, in a way, that's America forcing the rest of the world to also act as communists against these people, right? To restrict their freedom to trade. and their prosperity. And so you have like the Iranians at one point, a couple of years ago, the Iranians opened a small chain of grocery stores in Venezuela because no one else was willing to defy the sanctions regime to do any business with these people. And that's just not fair, man. That's collective punishment against the population of the country because we don't like the people in charge. And the only reason that the commies are in charge there at all is because it was already a commie country. It was just only the richest, whitest people benefited from the communism before. But essentially, like all the oil was always owned by the national government. It wasn't even owned by the Indians. It was just like under barren rocks. Like it wasn't good land where any private property owner ever lived on it. So then the oil was always owned by the government. And they used to funnel all that money to the very chosen few. Hugo Chavez and others exploited the resentment against that to come in, and they passed out that oil money to more people and poorer people. Not that he really like benefited them and made them rich, because socialism is stupid and doesn't work, but at least he was sharing the wealth a little bit broader and then had support from the people. You might remember in want to say 2019. I think it was in 19 when they did the coup with the failed coup with old what's his name? I'm sorry, I can picture his face, but his name is on the tip of my tongue here. Remind me, the guy that they failed to install in power in the first Trump term. Remember, what's his name again?
Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, you say?
No. In Venezuela, the guy that
Hugo Chavez.
No. The guy that they tried to put in power in the first Trump term. With a failed coup where Marco Rubio tried to put that idiot in there, and he was like the speaker of the parliament or something, and they were trying to put him in. Anyway, I'm sorry. They called for an attack on his own country. And the thing is, at the time, they showed where there were protests by the right who supported this guy. But then I saw footage on Twitter at the time of drone footage where there were literally like had to have been millions or at least hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people marching on the presidential palace to protect Maduro, rallying in support of him. And they were all the poor Indians, and they were the mass of the population. So even though he was a commie and impoverishing them, they were protecting their independence from this phony right-wing foreign-sponsored coup. And so,
Juan Guaido.
Yes, thank you. I swear to God, it's on the tip of my tongue, and I could not come up with it. I got what Biden's got these days. Juan Guaido, total sock puppet of a foreign power. So, like, if it's your country, do you prefer a local red or a foreign fascist? You know what I mean? And like for whoever, I just think that for almost everyone, independence comes first. And Maduro may be a horrible leader, but he's their guy. And I'm sorry, because the one thing I was going to say there, I remember seeing this footage where there were at least hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, and they're all wearing their like red hats or whatever in support of Maduro. And it's just a sea of them up and down all the streets around the presidential palace. And they're just, I mean, you couldn't imagine a scene like that in America or I don't know, maybe, but different circumstance, but just, yes, you can hold a protest of a bunch of right wingers who want rid of this guy, but they will have a much larger counter protest in his favor. The same thing happened in the Hugo Chavez years. You know, my friend Greg Palast is a reporter for BBC Newsnight, and he leans left at everything. But I remember him doing this report where he goes, behind me, you can see a huge protest against Hugo Chavez by these people who are sick and tired of his commie thing. And then he turns 90 degrees. And he goes, but here you can see behind me 20 million people saying, don't you dare lay a hand on Hugo Chavez, dude. And the pro-commie protest is 1,000 times the size of the anti-commie protest. Why? Because he's their guy. And the other guy is George W. Bush's guy. And so they can tell. And it's as simple as that. You know what I mean? It's the same thing as like, pretend for a moment that Donald Trump really was a Russian agent, which is 100% hoax and never happened. But if that was true, then I'm sorry, I would have to prefer Hillary Clinton to him. Because as horrible as she is, she represents New York banks, by golly, not Russian ones. and not Chinese ones. You know what I mean? She's American homegrown corruption of the very worst kind, blood-soaked and profane in all the worst ways, but she's our tyrant, right? And so you see what I mean? And so I say hands off Venezuela, man. Ridicule them into freedom and capitalism. They're doing it wrong. I mean, couldn't the three of us, couldn't we lecture them all day about how stupid they're doing it and how they ought to do it better? This is how property rights works. This is how prices work. Did you think you could outlaw prices and somehow just like rig an economy to work? Look at you. You're failing. And we could just, and it's the same thing with the rest of the world. I am an American chauvinist in a way, and I definitely am a Western chauvinist, and a true believer in libertarianism and capitalism, which means that every regime on the planet falls far short of my standards. And I'd be perfectly happy to lecture all of them all day on how they ain't good enough. But it'd be a lot easier to do that if my government wasn't actually the most violent and destructive and corrupt force on the face of the earth. Kind of got to point out a splinter in your eye while I got a plank in mine. Doesn't really work that well. So I think as soon as America tries to rein in our empire and run a commercial, limited republic, a free country, then we can show the people of the rest of the world by example without being bloody hypocrites and let them follow our way because we actually figured it out best is all, you know?
Priscilla, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have. Eu gostaria que você pudesse, nesse momento particular da entrevista, inserir para ele 2 perguntas que nós tivemos exclusivas dos grupos. Eu mandei uma e vou mandar outra no seu WhatsApp. Você pode dar uma olhadinha? Que eu acho que tem um gancho bem legal do que ele foi dito. I'm sorry for not speaking English, Scott, but I'm shameless. Sorry.
Is this question you send the last here? Yes. Number 30.
And I will send another.
Okay.
Thank
Professor
you.
Horton, there are some questions of some groups, and this one is from an institution here in Brazil that carries the name of Murray Rothbard. It's the Rothbard Institute. And the question is, after the Russian entry into the territory controlled by Ukraine, Putin was considered a libertator by the population of Donbass, which had been massacred by the Kiev regime since 2014. In February 2022, Putin recognized the independence of the separatist Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. Considering the libertarian position on the self-determination of people and secessions, can we say that up to this point, Putin conducted a just war, a fair war, or not?
No, I mostly agree with the premise of the question there, right? And the book, my book, Provoked, is about how this war was 49% Washington, D.C.'s fault. But ultimately, Putin did not have to escalate the war by 100,000% or however you want to measure it in early 2022, the way that he did. There was no immediate casus belli that demanded that he move. And the way I put it from time to time, I guess, if this makes sense, is that America put his back to the wall, not all the way in a corner. But then again, you put a guy's back to the wall, he might just fight you then and not wait till you have him all the way in a corner, right? And I think that that is a pretty good way to analyze it. And he gave them plenty of fair warning. I think that they refused to negotiate in good faith. And I think that they thought that they were clever, baiting him into the war. And in fact, I quote Vladimir Putin in the book saying, I think they're trying to trick me into doing this. I think they want me to invade Ukraine. But they're rigging it in a way where I might just have to, right? Because it is true that they refused to negotiate in good faith. However, I think he did have alternatives. I lay out in the book other things that he could have done short of war to escalate the conflict, to try to twist arms and force the West to give in to his demands. And I also argue in the book that he'll regret it. And that ultimately, even though the Russians are going to win the war one way or the other, whether this current peace deal goes through or whether they win the war on the battlefield in another year and a half from now, or however it all pans out, that ultimately they're going to wish they hadn't have done this. Because what they've done is they've taken everyone in Ukraine who ever liked them out of Ukraine by drawing these new borders around them and saying they're all part of the Russian Federation now. And that leaves, look, America had to overthrow the government there twice in 10 years because the people kept voting wrong. They kept voting for the guy who sort of leaned toward Russia, or at least was softer on the Russian position. Well, that's never going to happen again. Now it's going to be far right-wingers from the far west of the country who absolutely hate Russia and are, going to be led by veterans of the current war. And it's going to be an ongoing frozen conflict, much worse than, much worse than at least before 2014. And even in the civil war between 2014 and 22, it was horrible. And a lot of people died, about 9,000 the first year and 4,000 for over the next 6 years after that. So that's a lot of people dying in artillery strikes and all, especially if you're one of them. On the other hand, compare that violence to what's happened since. The absolute destruction of Eastern Ukraine, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people killed and wounded, maybe more than 1 million casualties overall. Some say more than 1 million casualties on each side. I don't know if they're really that high or not, but still, I mean, it has been like World War I, except with drones over there. It has been ugly fighting, just absolutely brutal. And it's helped to lead to the real destruction, disillusion of Ukrainian society, where, they already were in a huge demographic crisis, and now millions of people have fled the country. It's also been very costly for Russia. They have lost hundreds of thousands of guys. They have spent millions, tens, hundreds of millions of rubles on the thing, however they measure that, but a hell of a lot of money, maybe not as much as the West has spent. They have spent a lot of money and a lot of resources, diverted a lot of resources to war use. It's bad for their economy as it is ours, and they're going to pay the price for all of that. In the end, they may have decided, he has decided that it was worth it. Putin it was worth it to do it, but I beg to differ. I think that in the end, 20 years from now, people would say, yeah, Horton was right. The Russians really screwed themselves by doing that. And I think, in fact, they probably painted themselves in a corner. They're going to have to just keep fighting, because even if they get, say, a ceasefire now, say they're able to push through the current deal, and then they have this far right-wing government from the far west of the country that rules everything west of the Dnieper River. I don't know how long that status quo can last before both sides start breaking the deal and go back to fighting again. You know what I mean? It's like leaving Al-Qaeda hole up in the Idlib province indefinitely. At some point, they're going to break out of there, and this thing's going to heat back up again, which is what happened a year ago there in Syria. You know what I mean?
This brings to the next question, that is, what is your opinion on the current situation in Georgia, particularly regarding its foreign policy? Do you think that, it's the same, from the same institute, the question, okay? Do you think that if the Georgian Dream Party remains in power in the coming years, something similar to what happened in Ukraine in 2014 could occur?
Oh, yes. If he's saying, might America try to overthrow the Georgian dream? Yes. And they did overthrow Shevardnadze in favor of Saakashvili back in 2003 in the the Rose Revolution, which was completely engineered by the United States of America. And might they try that again? Yes.
Do you think that another war could start and this could...
God, I hope not. I'll tell you, over the last few years, they have had these massive protests basically by the NGOs. The thing is about Georgia, it's a very small and very poor country. And so these so-called non-governmental organizations, they become like this massive and important part of the economy where, like, for example, college-educated females, that's where they go to work. That is their entire economy in that country, is to go work for these foreign-sponsored NGOs. And it's just a huge thing. So you see these giant protests that my friend Brad Pierce, he says, this is essentially an organized labor protest by the NGO staff. You know what I mean? That they're completely dependent on Western money and all that. And so it's distorted their politics terribly. Now, on the other hand, Georgian Dream is run or, largely financed by one major oligarch, a Georgian who made most of his money in Russia and is presumed to then be very close to Russia, or at least take their interests much more into account. And is, if you ask Washington, they'd say he's nothing but a sock puppet of Moscow, which I think is probably overstating the case. But the thing is, the crucial issue here is pipeline routes. Now, America has the BTC pipeline that runs west through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and then into Turkey and to the port of Jayan in Turkey. But and even when Georgia started the war and Russia finished it in 2008, they did not sever the pipeline. They did not go down all the way to the BTC pipeline and destroy it or sack the capital city of Georgia and reabsorb it into their empire. They did reabsorb South Ossetia and on the southern side of the mountains there, and Abkhazia too as well. But the Americans' point of view there, and this is why they backed the Chechen terrorists there, even when they're suicide bombing bin Laden-like crazies, is to try to prevent the Russians from reopening their old or making a new oil pipeline that goes from the Caspian Basin north through the northern Caucasus Mountains and to the port of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. And so that was really the whole reason that Bill Clinton backed Osama bin Laden's forces in Chechnya in the late 1990s, and W. Bush continued that policy into the early 2000s, was to prevent that from happening. So I should be reading oilprice.com every day. I got too many projects to keep an eye on them all, but I would very much like to, I ought to ask some AI bot to keep me updated always on what is going on in pipeline politics, especially in the northern Caucasus. And are the Russians getting anywhere close to being able to reopen pipelines through Chechnya and Dagestan and all of that? And then what is America doing to intervene in there? And believe me, if they think that they could take Georgia away from a pro-Russian party now, they would take the opportunity to try to do it.
So we could resume everything in money, energy, and wealthiness. All the war are always pointing to the energy problem, which is where the money in the end goes to, because that's the point. And this brings, and if you agree with this affirmation, I would like to ask one question from Dan again, which asks you the following. With major American right-wing figures like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens turning against Zionism, along with the rise of Nick Fuentes, Dave Smith, and even yourself, do you think that the land-stealing, genocidal, and rapist state of Israel could lose U.S. support and cease to exist in its current militaristic form? It's a very hard to answer question.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, there's a big crack up coming. It's happening right now.
Fernando Chioca asked this question.
Yeah. What we have is the war party in power in Washington with all the money and all the organizational skills versus more and more just the mass of the American people. Now, on the Democratic Party side, it's just almost entirely the donors and owners of the party versus the voters. And not just the leftists and the progressives, but the center left liberals and everybody are just sick and tired of Israel. They've seen so much carnage come out of Gaza over the last couple of years.
Chioca asked that question.
Priscilla, your microphone is open.
Oh, it's okay. And then this is happening more and more on the right, as your questioner put it. You got Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. Candace Owens said in no uncertain terms, she says, I would rather saw off my own foot than ever support Israel again with a rusty saw, right? Like, she is over it, and she has brought a lot of people with her. And it's the same for Tucker Carlson. He's just like, look, I'm not. And if you listen to Tucker explain, he really is the moral voice of the right. He doesn't say this could cause blowback terrorism against us. He doesn't say this is costing too much money. He says this is wrong. This is an abomination. There's no way in the world we're allowed to treat God's other children this way. This is, you know what I mean? And that's the only way he talks about it. It's just, if you went to church on Sunday, then you have to be against supporting Israel, killing Palestinians on Monday. It just, you cannot have it both ways. And so that is causing just massive shockwaves through the right, where they've been told the exact opposite, actually, that Jesus wants you to help kill these children, or else. And people more and more, they go, you know what? That actually doesn't really sound right when I think about all the other things that Jesus taught in that book. You know what I mean? And so it's a huge crack up, and the war party's desperate. And so that's why they'll accuse you and me of all just waking up in the morning and hating Jews for no reason or some kind of thing, because they can't face up to the fact that they've just picked the side of evil. And Israel, I don't think without any question, is by far the most criminal regime on the face of the earth right now. They're the most just absolutely murderous and most dishonest and just, profane. And they just indulge in evil, enjoy it in a way that you don't even hear from like the military dictatorship in Myanmar or nothing. Like nobody, no regime on the planet revels in cruelty the way that the Israelis do. It's just sickening. And you think about what they have to make up these ridiculous lies that this is what the Chinese are doing in the Xinjiang province in Western China. Well, you know what? I think we'd have some documented evidence of that if they were going through, if they killed 3 million people, like in some of the claims. Wow, it took George Bush and Dick Cheney and Barack Obama and Joe Biden 15 years of unlimited carnage across Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan to kill 4 million people. The Chinese killed 3 million just invisibly. Here's the proof, is a picture of some Chinese guys in prison. And you go, oh my God, Chinese guys in prison. I guess they must have killed 3 million of them. Meanwhile, and look, I'm not sticking up for Beijing. They're the Chicoms. I'm picking on them. I'm using them as the example. They're the Chicoms. They literally have a red commie flag to this day. But there's nothing compared to the cruelty and the brutality and the totalitarianism of the Israeli regime. And the American people, you know what I mean? We have this saying in my country, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. You know?
See, yes.
You can't just use us and abuse us and lie to us and condescend to us and then insult us and call us Nazis when
let
we
me translate this song. Não mije na minha perna e diga que está chovendo. That's it. Don't piss on my legs and say it's raining. Yes.
That's right. Yep.
Americans libertarians do not pay much attention to the positions of Milley. I asked you in the very beginning of our
chat. I don't know much. I plead ignorance on that. I know he just took a giant bailout from the American taxpayer, and I'm against that.
But the point is, there are a lot of libertarians in Brazil that are against in the politics of Milley. And the question for you is, the first elected president that called himself a Hofbardian anarcho-capitalist, even though he is neither libertarian nor Austrian. That's the assumption made by the one that's asking. I don't agree with that, okay? Don't you think that major American libertarian figures and institutions should strongly reject Milley's libertarian claims, since he is associating the name of libertarianism with the most rotten side of the American imperialist politics, namely support for Zelensky's in Ukraine, Netanyahu in Israel, and fiat monetarist policies indebting Argentina taxpayers by the billions. But before you answer that, I must say I am an ambassador of the Foro Alberdiano International Alberdian Forum, which is a movement of one classical liberal that was born in 1820 in Argentina. And I do agree with the politics in the economic area of Milei's project to change from a system that created a lot of money out of thin air. Of course, he's at this moment of history in the world. It's harder to make the Argentina pesos be linked in gold than in dollar. And in the very first moment, we should make this conversion in dollars, but later on we could do like El Salvador, which is a very small country, to make a vinculation, a link with the Argentina peso, with gold or with Bitcoin or whatever. But at this moment, there was a need to make the money worth again. So the point is, do you think Milei does not represent the libertarianism, or we should do a step-by-step heading the final aim? That's the point. Your microphone is not.
Sorry, I do that sometimes. His Zionism is very suspect, of course. I know that Daniel McAdams and Dr. Ron Paul have been against him and have said don't believe the hype about this guy from the very beginning. I admit I have not really looked very deeply into what's going on. I know that on the basic level, he ran on, we're going to lick inflation, we're going to lift all the price controls, lift all the rent controls, we're going to try to smash labor and the socialist parts of the economy and free it up. And like, trust me, everybody, your rent's going to go down. But you got to let people build new houses and whatever. Is like trying to explain some basic capitalist economics to a population, especially the poorer part of the population that is always, more susceptible to arguments of socialism, that like, why wait? You can have it free now, or just have the government give it to you or whatever. And he's trying to explain that like, no, we can have it all if we'll do it for ourselves. And, but as far as like what his actual policies are in power, as far as like who he's taxing and where that money's going and how much he's inflating and who he's regulating and who he's not, who's benefiting from it all, and the role of Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv in it all, whatever, I plead ignorance about all of those things. So it's very hard to just be ideologically free market when in practice, politics is the question of who owns what resources. And, you have places like Ukraine where depending on who wins the election, they'll just take a mine away from your company and give it to their brother-in-law's company instead, or something just as absurd and extreme as that. But there are variations on those kinds of questions anywhere you go. And so, in fact, it's probably unavoidable that people are going to be coming to him to make decisions about who's going to get to make all the money off of this or that policy. And pretty hard to be Hans Hoppian anarcho-capitalist when you're literally the president of a sovereign nation state. You know what I mean? So assuming he's even trying, he's got a hell of a lot of rows to hoe. But I really don't know enough about the guy. I know that Daniel McAdams is like, this guy's a snake. Don't trust him. And I do trust Dan McAdams. So I'm willing to roll with that. You know what I mean? If you quote me, that's the quote.
Okay. Well, I have one last question. Priscila, if you have any other questions, please write me down. Escreva para mim no WhatsApp se tiver alguma outra pergunta. Eu vou fazer minha última pergunta para o professor Scott Horton. Professor, one last question. Where do you think the United States is going to end with this Trump policy of protectionism? This never end up well in any place in the world. And the United States, you are a rich country made of dollar, which is a paper painted with no values at all. And what United States always grew up was, my father used to say that, what the United States exports inflation, prints money,
Yep.
and put the money all abroad and buy all the wealthiness of the other countries to the Americans. So you have cheap orange juice, cheap meat, cheap because you were exchanging paper by food, paper against oil, and all over all kinds of products that were produced all over the world. And now, Trump is doing something unthinkable, saying, no, I want that the American people that was not used to produce things in the quantity we consume, and now I want that the products be produced inside the United States. But at the same moment, he put all the cheap labor, which are people from other countries to produce that, out of the game. So we don't need to be an expert in an economy to say this will not stand. And what will be, my question is, as you understand the philosophy of the American people, what will the common man in a common town think when the prices goes up? What's gonna happen?
Yeah. You know, it's so funny, man, because it's one of these issues, like we're just saying about socialism, where the poor people just want to hear that socialism will handle it. And it's a harder explanation that no, freedom will benefit us all better in the long term, that kind of thing. It's the same sort of thing here, where it's, I guess Frederick Bastiat talked about the seen and the unseen, right? So you can see that your factory is closed and your factory jobs are gone. In fact, in some cases, even small towns were destroyed when factories closed down and all that. You can't see necessarily all the other jobs that were created when that capital was diverted to other uses, or you can't see the savings when the things that factory was producing were then produced for a much lower cost, and other people were able to save on their margin and invest their money in something else that produced something else. All that, you have to have the economic imagination to understand how those kinds of things can work. And after all, like if your town closes down, then yeah, but some guy in California made more money. It ain't gonna make you feel much better. You know what I mean? So like, it can be a mess. Right away, when they announce tariffs, prices go way up, and we already have massive price inflation. Now, tariffs are actually counter-inflationary. They drive prices up, but that's not the same as expanding the money supply. They're actually making business more expensive in real terms, and is actually like deflationary pressure on the economy due to those rising prices. Although they can trigger, cascading other higher prices in other places, it's still a different phenomenon than monetary and price inflation in that sense. And then, so people will react against that. We saw, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, people are freaking about the tariffs and the cost of living, and the tariff increases of the cost of living on top of the price inflation we're already suffering. And Trump panicked and rolled back some of the tariffs.
Yeah, yes.
Right. And said, well, I don't know. I guess that wasn't working. So it's true, I guess, that if he said, okay, from now on, we have 100% or 500% tariff on ovens, then we're not going to be able to make ovens in China anymore. And the oven companies are going to return home, and they'll have good paying jobs for hardworking labor union guys to make ovens. And then for the restaurants who want to buy those ovens, they'll pay twice the price as they would when they were buying one from China. And so somebody gains and somebody loses. And that's assuming that you keep those tariffs on long enough that fine, the entire oven industry comes home. But that's not a safe bet. We might just end up moving it to Canada instead or something. It still might not come back to Missouri or wherever it was before. So again, when you ask a national government to have an economic program, they're just going to screw it all up. Now, you could say that them lowering all trade barriers is a policy of its own as well. In most cases, what they call free trade is actually part of American imperialism. They say, listen, we will lower tariffs on you, but you can keep your tariffs on us. But we get to have military bases in your country and dictate your foreign policy to you, right? That's our deal with South Korea, with Japan, with Italy, and Germany, and France, and Britain, which is a very beneficial policy for Washington, very, to the direct disadvantage of the American people, maybe to the advantage of American consumers, but not job holders, where, you know what I mean? You might have 3 gig jobs and wish you just had one real one. You know what I mean? And Trump, see, he's a business guy, but he's a real estate tycoon. So he has a very narrow view, and he's a very successful one, of course. He's made a hell of a lot of money in it. But, and I'm sure there's a lot of things about business and economics that he understands that I don't. But I know that the lens that he's looking at it through, in fact, I saw the quote yesterday, lower the interest rates, lower. That's all he knows. Keep inflating the bubble, because if you stop inflating it, that's when it pops. And that can't happen until 2029. Thank you very much. After he is gone, can that happen, right? So lower those interest rates or I'll fire your ass. He's going after the Fed the way no other president would go after him. Just for the one thing, to try to force interest rates lower, because in his mind, that's the only way for his benefit, to rig the economy, to keep it essentially hot. Whether that means ultimately more or less offshoring, to him means less than whether the overall economic outlook is positive on the news that night versus not. Which, again, it's worth emphasizing. During the good times is when prices are going up so high that you can't afford to buy milk or orange juice or pancakes for your kids. That's the good times, is in the artificial inflationary prosperity before the giant crash comes, and now you have no job, and now you can't afford to feed them a damn thing at all. Right?
If you let me, I will do a forecast. I came from the same segment, real estate, as Donald Trump.
Uh-huh.
And I always was a studious of the Austrian school, and which has the most the main answers to a market that's very complex. But what's going to happen in the near future in the United States is that Donald Trump is allowing BlackRock and all other funds to become owner of all the real estate properties in the United States. You will never have houses anymore. You're going to have to live renting the properties. Not all of you, but the ones that would buy a new house will never do that anymore. I was reading some data, and nowadays the mean term of how many the people are paying of their income to live in the United States in their own properties is 34%. Old loans, and the new ones is 37%, and there is a maximum that is 30%. And what's going on is that the funds, the BlackRock and other funds, are now owing all the properties, all the real estate, all the houses, so they don't want.
Internet. Eu acho que a internet do Rodrigo caiu, voltou.
You?
Agora voltou, aham.
Okay, Professor Horton, did you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, and the point is, these international funds will be the owner of all the real estates, which in the last point, in the last margin of all accounts, is that where you're gonna have to live. And if you don't own where you're going to live, you are only someone that don't own the private property. You lose the feeling that you are a free man. And that's the point. What is not, at least in my opinion, is not being considered by Donald Trump. Or
and why is that happening? Why is that happening? That's government policy encouraging those giant firms to go into real estate to prop up the prices of houses. And you got millions of unoccupied homes. They can't just let the free market sort it out because it would be a massive crash. And you have all the old people, the baby boom generation, they have all their equity is tied up in their homes. And they've had, it's hard to tell them like, hey, remember when you bought this house for $100,000? Now it's worth $1 million. Well, that means that poor people and young people can't own homes. And quite frankly, as Obama would say, you didn't build that. This is just welfare. The government created money and funneled it into your sector. Now you're going to have to take a haircut, which sucks because these are old people who don't have jobs anymore and oftentimes are in ill health and all this stuff. It's now at the end of their life. They have got to get screwed so that the rest of the population of the country can afford to move on. I mean, this is not funny what you're talking about here, where people who, the average age of a first-time homeowner now is 40 years old, between 38, 40 years old. What that means is young people cannot own homes. Young families cannot own homes. Young people cannot have families because they can't own homes. I mean, it's not deliberate on the part of them overall, but in effect, it's the baby boom generation blowing the kids' brains out for their tired old asses who already got to have a life and one on welfare where they were collecting all this inflationary money and refinancing their home, cashing out and buying fancy new countertops and all of this stuff with money that they didn't earn. It was just printed by the government and handed to them. No different if they were a ghetto welfare queen in a Cadillac with 10 kids or whatever. Probably worse.
Before giving you the last minutes of our meeting for you to say goodbye to our audience, I would ask you if you agree with my statement. That meeting in Jekyll Island in 1913 destroyed America.
Pretty bad. Yep, it was the Morgans and the Rockefellers and Schiff and all the Warburgs, and they all met and wrote up the Federal Reserve Act. And it's other than James Madison and Benjamin Franklin screwing up and creating the U.S. Congress in the first place, it was probably the worst mistake in American history. It absolutely is giving the national government a license to counterfeit money to engage in any criminal scheme they could possibly come up with, and they've done nothing but abuse it since then.
Thank you very much, Professor Horton. Priscilla, if you have any question to Professor Horton, please.
Eu mandei para você no grupo do WhatsApp, a gente só tem mais 15 minutos para o encerramento. Eu acho que é o gancho perfeito agora para a finalização da nossa entrevista.
Okay, what beneficial outcomes can be expected from an international event held in Brazil that brings together libertarians from various spectrums, purists, minarchists, gradualists, etc.? And I will let you say goodbye because we have 2 hours of conversation and it's not too easy to do that. Thank you very much, Professor Horton. That's the last question, I promise.
Thank you. Well, I don't really know for sure. Well, I do know that it's a really great thing to have people of like minds coming together and sharing and spreading these ideas and vouching for each other and introducing people to each other who can work together on these things in the future. I am very far apart from the Marxists and their whole belief about the inevitability of history and all of these things. I'm an individualist. So I look at the whole dang history of humanity as being the results of, for good or for ill, decisions that people made that could, in many cases, have gone the other way. And so I think it's up to us who at least think we got good ideas to make sure and spread them so other people can make decisions, hopefully that we would agree with based on our same shared principles. And in favor of life and liberty and prosperity and freedom for everyone, which is, of course, the highest ideals of humanity.
I would like to invite, I'm going to say in Portuguese for our Brazilian and people that speak Portuguese audience, that the book you said, What is Seen and What's Not Seen, which was written by Bastia, is one of the courses that we have in the Instituto Liberal from Alta Noroeste, which is a micro-region here in Brazil. We have a lot of courses out there, the human action, what's seen and what's not seen from Bastia, the law of Bastia, the essential von Mises, which was written by Murray Rothbard, and it explains in a short way the 6 lessons and a lot of courses that we open free for the audience. It was an enormous pleasure to meet you, to know you, Professor Horton. And what I would like to say is that in the next year, we'll be here with an international congress. And I would like to ask you, and I'm going to say in Portuguese later if you accept, your Libertarian Institute will be invited to correct, to help the committee, the editorial committee that will make all the procedures of the Congress, that we want to receive articles written for people that fight for liberty and suggesting what is the way for a free society, a real free society. So, thank you very much, and I'm gonna say all this in Portuguese now. Pessoal, quero dizer que nós temos nossos cursos gratuitos no ILAM, desde o que se vê e o que não se vê, a lei, o essencial von Mises, as 6 lições, o ação humana completo. E o ano que vem, nós vamos trazer para o Brasil o primeiro Congresso Internacional Liberin, homenagem ao projeto idealizado pela Priscila, e que eu tenho certeza vai ser um divisor de águas. Nós vamos querer ter pessoas como o professor Horton aqui conosco e muitos outros que já estão em fase muito avançada de negociação. Vai ser um evento único, mas não último na história daqueles que lutam pela liberdade. Pri, a palavra está contigo, eu só tenho a agradecer por essa oportunidade maravilhosa que você me concedeu de conversar aqui com o professor Horton, que foi um motivo de muito orgulho. Obrigado.
Bom, eu vou pedir para o Rodrigo fazer uma tradução rapidinho para o professor Scott Horton. E aí nós seguimos com a nossa audiência, dando a notícia do Congresso Internacional Liberin. Então, esse é o motivo da parceria do Liberin com a OCL, mas segura aí que nós já falaremos disso assim que nós nos despedirmos do Scott Horton. Eu gostaria que o Rodrigo falasse no inglês muito melhor do que o meu, que eu agradeço muito pelo Scott Horton estar aqui conosco nessa entrevista, novamente pela gentileza da Rachel, e que eu fiz um convite para ele para estar aqui em julho do ano que vem, em Araçatuba, integrando o Congresso Internacional Liberin. Nós já temos contratos em andamento com palestrantes internacionais, nacionais, já tudo bem amarradinho nos bastidores, e gostaríamos muito que o Scott Horton viesse presencialmente. Nós passamos os detalhes depois, como será, mas que ele não precisa se preocupar com nada. E também esse convite que o Rodrigo fez, né, do instituto dele, é também fazer parte do comitê da banca, né, examinadora. Então, se o Rodrigo puder falar que seria uma honra, se ele poderia, entre os dias 9, 10, 11, 12, dar uma olhadinha na agenda dele, vai ser a Copa do Mundo e nós transmitiremos a Copa do Mundo durante o evento. Então, nós já estamos falando mais um detalhezinho aqui. Por favor, Rodrigo, eu agradeço. Obrigada, viu?
Obrigado a você. Professor, your last words. I'm just going to translate what Priscilla said, that it will be an honor for us if you can reschedule your agenda and come to Brazil in the July 9th till 12th. And it would be an honor for us to have the Libertarian Institute to be one of the part of all these international congress. It will be held here in Brazil. It will be held here in Brazil, and I just have to thank you in the name of all people that fight for freedom abroad, all over the world, for your work and for all the things that you bring to the truth, being an American, saying the truth inside the United States, which I imagine that's not easy to do, because sometimes we have to fight difficult battles, and I know what is that, and thank you very much. I can't express how thankful I am of your moment with us.
Thank you both so much for having me. It's really been great to be with you, and I'll definitely look into seeing what we can do about this summer. But it's been a great time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, Professor. Estamos somente nós.
Agora nós pedimos para que a audiência, por favor, fique conosco, né? Ao vivo, nós fecharemos às 18 horas, né, Rodrigo?
Sim.
Então, muito obrigada por todos que entraram, pelos que ficaram até aqui, pela interação no chat, ao vivo. Deixaremos essa entrevista ao vivo, trabalharemos na legenda em português posteriormente dela, mas eu acredito que tem como pôr a tradução automática em inglês, acho que já ajuda bastante, né, para quem até a gente providenciar a tradução. E sim, o motivo da parceria entre o Liberin e a OCL, a Ordem dos Cavaleiros da Liberdade, representada aqui pelo Rodrigo Andolfato, é que eu venho falando já tem muitos meses, desde que o Liberin surgiu, que não é muito tempo, mas tenho tido a honra de ter grandes convidados comigo e grandes apoiadores, como o Rodrigo também. Eu gostaria muito de organizar um evento libertário no Brasil que tivesse grandes nomes da cena mundial libertária. Acontece que nós vamos conseguir fazer isso. Eu nem acredito que eu estou dando essa notícia para vocês. Nós conseguimos um modelo de negócios que é necessário para que isso aconteça, para que se concretize de fato. E sim, o Congresso Internacional Liberin está sendo anunciado oficialmente hoje, no dia 21 de novembro de 2025, mas nada disso estaria acontecendo sem o auxílio, a parceria, então uma organização em conjunto com o Rodrigo Andolfato, da OCL. Teremos também o apoio da Confederação 9 de Julho, também a Araçatuba S.A. vai estar conosco também, porque o armamento é muito importante, é uma pauta nossa, é uma pauta libertária, mas majoritariamente, né, a OCL e a Confederação 9 de Julho. Nós estamos muito felizes de anunciar isso para vocês. Estamos anunciando porque já temos meio caminho andado dos nomes importantes que queremos que estejam, já deram o ok. Por enquanto, nós não revelaremos os nomes, mas fiquem atentos, que vocês vão cair, como dizem aqui no Sul, né? Vocês vão cair da cadeira. Quando vocês souberem, né, os nomes que nós traremos, nós estamos pensando num formato totalmente viável para trazer pessoas do Brasil, da América Latina também. Pretendemos que seja um evento grande. Estamos anunciando hoje um evento que vai acontecer em julho, para que você já possa ir se organizando de logística e financeiramente também para estar nesse evento. Estamos pensando em todos os detalhes. Olha, vou falar uma coisa. Nós não estamos pensando em margem de lucro, né, Rodrigo? Nós estamos pensando em apenas cobrir e pagar as despesas. Então, eu acho muito importante essa fidelidade com o meu público. Acho que o Rodrigo também tem isso. Nesse momento, o Congresso Internacional Liberin, em parceria com a OCL, não está pensando num modelo de negócios lucrativo para nós financeiramente. Nós não estamos pensando nisso. Então, confiem em nós que todo o valor estabelecido está sendo pensado com carinho. Cada parceria que estamos fazendo, cada negócio que estamos fazendo é para que todos consigam estar e aproveitar esse momento que vai ser histórico. Eu mencionei que será durante a Copa, nas quartas de final, e já temos a solução, teremos telão, né, Rodrigo? Assim que os horários dos jogos estiverem disponíveis, nós teremos telão, vai ter a carne que o brasileiro gosta, a cerveja, enfim, nosso público masculino pode ficar bem tranquilo que vai ser muito legal. Eu passo a palavra agora ao Rodrigo, gostaria que ele, né, também comentasse da parte dele, e peço para que vocês fiquem na melhor expectativa possível, porque nas próximas semanas, meses, teremos muito o que fazer e anunciar para vocês. Muito obrigada, viu? E obrigada, Rodrigo. Eu te agradeço publicamente por esse apoio que você está dando ao Liberin e a quem acredita no Liberin. Muito obrigada, assim, do fundo do meu coração. Eu vou ficar emocionada, então eu vou parar de falar por essa parceria. Eu quero que vou ficar emocionada, então eu vou parar de falar. Obrigada, Rodrigo.
Eu que agradeço. Faltam 4 minutos para a gente encerrar nossa live. Eu sou muito grato a você, Priscila, pela confiança. E uma coisa que eu gostaria de dizer é o seguinte, e você já sempre deixa isso muito claro, nós podemos divergir no caminho, na escolha, talvez, dos métodos, mas todas as pessoas com quem eu convivo, e a gente teve uma live no Instagram, e tem as provocações, e é natural, e isso é bom. As provocações servem para a gente crescer, para a gente debater. A gente não pode pensar que nós, dentro do nosso pequeno mundo de pessoas que já entenderam que a liberdade é algo inegociável, nós não podemos odiar uns aos outros. E a prova disso é que a pessoa que me indicou para que você me chamasse para a gente tentar organizar esse congresso é uma pessoa que algumas pessoas poderiam dizer, são brigados, que é o caso do Fernando Quioca, e ele, muito abnegadamente, de qualquer ego, me indicou, fale com o Rodrigo tem esse expertise. E assim como eu sempre digo, eu gosto demais do Fernando. O Fernando tem uma posição dura, porque ele é uma pessoa que está no primeiro momento no fronte de batalha para lutar pela liberdade. E existem uma série de pessoas, eu não sou o único membro da OCL, e também não sou o único membro da Confederação 9 de Julho, que pretende estar em todos os territórios, em todo mundo que queira se confederar em busca pela luta pela liberdade, pelo direito da gente exercer o papel de poder moderador. Então tem muita gente que está ao meu lado. Eu não estou sozinho, eu teria que agradecer a um monte de gente, então não vou fazê-lo assim, vou dizer que todos estão representados na gratidão que eu agradeço ao Fernando e, obviamente, à Priscila. E como a Priscila disse, nós não estamos pensando em subsidiar-nos, né, com o lucro do que vai acontecer nesse evento. Nós estamos pensando em trazer grandes nomes, e custa caro, né, o nosso real é fraco frente ao dólar, e então para você trazer alguém de longe demanda muito dinheiro, mas o fato virão pessoas que muito provavelmente vai demorar muitos anos para voltar num conjunto da obra em que nós criaremos aqui no Brasil. Então, eu sou muito grato a você, Priscila, pela oportunidade que você me concedeu. Então, muito obrigado a todos e até uma próxima live, que vai ser um prazer enorme poder estar contigo sempre que você me chamar.
Obrigada, Rodrigo. Eu quero só fazer um acréscimo de 1 minuto. Posso? O purismo, se eu ficasse só no meu espectro purista, esse evento não aconteceria. Nós precisamos dar as mãos, o Rodrigo disse muito francamente, é um modelo de negócios caro, trazer pessoas é caro, envolve dinheiro, nós somos libertários, a gente tem que saber que tudo vale dinheiro, né? Se nós não soubermos disso, quem que vai saber, né, Rodrigo? Exato. O quanto vale o dinheiro, a propriedade, o quanto vale o livre comércio. Então, nós discutimos isso, basicamente. E todo mundo vai sair ganhando, eu estou bem animada. E nós citamos com recorrência o Fernando, no caso, que é aquele que está mais em contato conosco, porque indiretamente nós estamos tendo o apoio do Instituto Rothbard Brasil, que é representado pelo Fernando, assim como também de várias outras frentes, como o Rodrigo também falou. E nós agradecemos publicamente esse apoio do Instituto Rothbard, que para nós significa muito. Um instituto que se diz purista, se posiciona, estar apoiando. Então, para vocês verem que o nosso trabalho é muito sério, que vocês, puristas, saibam que o nosso trabalho é muito sério. Ninguém aqui está se vendendo para ninguém, né, Rodrigo? Aqui nós estamos trabalhando para algo muito grande, muito bonito. Eu tenho certeza que vocês vão, pirar. Tá bom? Muito obrigada, gente, por essa live. Encerramos agora, 18h01. Tenham um ótimo fim de semana. Fiquem atentos nas redes sociais do Instituto Ilan e do Projeto Liberin e teremos muitas novidades. Bom fim de semana a todos. Até mais. Obrigada, Rodrigo.
Tchau, tchau.